Well, yes, you know firsthand because you came out and spent a week helping us upgrade this camera. But at the time, we had no idea if Iris would have survived the winter. She's fairly old, we think, probably 15 years at least, and we didn't know if Louis would come back. So we were all, it was uncertain. And given that the last 2 years there's been no chicks hatching here at this nest, we've all been on pins and needles. So it's been fantastic to see eggs, 4 eggs laid, and now 3 eggs, 3 chicks, still surviving as we speak. For the college, this is the first year we've run. Well, this is the first year that the college just opened about a month ago, and this is the first year that we're running it through the college. And so Dean Shannon O'Brien is super excited about this. So this successful breeding attempt so far means an awful lot to the Missoula Osprey Project, to University of Montana, to the Missoula College, and to the community of Missoula, and I know to all the viewers all around the world who are watching as well. So it's a big year. It's a very big year.
That's awesome. One of the things that I think lots of people have questions about, because many of the people watching right now watched from the starting of the hatch of the very first egg to where we are right now. And a couple of people reached out to us on Twitter or email, but we've seen this a lot throughout the fallout after the first chick wandered out in the middle of the night. And so Julie on Twitter was wondering why Iris was unable to corral number one, and Faith Elizabeth over email wrote in asking if you thought it's possible that Iris knew something was amiss and just let it go. I wonder if you could comment a little bit about that.
Yeah, great questions, Julie and Elizabeth, and they're things we've been wondering as well. You know, it's a little, so I don't know the answer to those questions, but I suspect that, you know, it was the middle of the night when the first chick wandered away. It was about 1:30 in the morning or so, and I suspect that Iris just didn't see it. It was very dark. We have the benefit of having night vision goggles, so to speak, with infrared illuminator. So it looks like there's a bright light shining on the nest all night, but it's basically heat. We can't see it. She can't see it. So I suspect she just might not have even realized that there was a chick that had wandered away. This is the first time we've ever seen this in all of our years with the camera, and I'm not sure that any other Osprey nest cameras have seen this. I don't know what to make of it, but the first chick, well, all of these chicks, it seems, are incredibly vigorous and energetic. So, I mean, even from the hatch of the first egg, I mean, the egg was rocking and it popped out, and this little dinosaur popped out. So it was very energetic from the get-go. In reviewing the video that night from when it wandered away, it looked like it was hungry. I mean, it was begging in the middle of the night, and just then went on a walkabout and got stuck on the edge of the nest, and they can't thermoregulate, and it was a pretty cold night, so I think it died of hypothermia pretty quickly. But I don't know. I've never seen it, but this was a very, very active first chick, and I can just put it down to, you know, maybe having a little bit too much energy, but mystery.
Yeah, it's very strange, and certainly is nothing I've ever come across, and probably some of our Osprey watchers out there are even more knowledgeable about what has happened on other cams. So if people out there have seen stuff like this happen, please let us know over email. It'd be great to hear from those of you if you've ever seen anything like this happen.
Yeah, we'd be very interested, all of us, to hear from other people's experience if they've ever seen chicks wander around like this in the middle of the night. Yeah.
And so, sort of on the heels of thinking about number one wandering around and probably dying from the exposure, there was lots of excitement over the weekend as well about interactions between the chicks. And I wonder if maybe right now would be a great time to sort of explain a little bit more about what's happening at this stage, and also what's at risk at this stage.
Yeah. So we deal with this every year, and And it's not just ospreys, it's all raptors and lots of other birds actually that lay eggs a few days apart, but they start incubating as soon as the first egg is hatched. And so what ends up happening is the first chick hatches 2 or 3 days before the second chick, and it hatches 2 or 3 days before the third chick, and so on. And this results in this huge difference in sizes between the chicks. And we can see this right now. The second chick is quite a bit bigger than the third chick, and they're both a lot bigger than the fourth chick. This is called hatching asynchrony, and it results in sort of Russian dolls in chick sizes, with a big one, a smaller one, a smaller one yet. And this seems to be an adaptation where we see this in birds, this hatching asynchrony and this big discrepancy in sizes. We see it in birds in which there's a very unpredictable food supply from year to year. And it seems to be sort of an insurance policy. And what happens right now, so the biggest chick is probably twice as the weight, the mass of the youngest chick. And if there's enough fish coming in, generally the largest chick gets, and it's the most aggressive and the most vigorous for begging, it seems to get fed first. Once it's cropped out and pretty full, it tends to just snooze off, and if there's enough fish, all of the chicks will get fed. If there's not enough fish coming in, not enough food, or the fishing conditions are really difficult, what happens is that hunger seems to trigger a very aggressive behavior in the offspring, and they'll start, and we saw this, they'll start pecking on their siblings. They'll get really aggressive, and they will not only outcompete their smaller siblings for food, but actively sometimes peck them to death. This is called siblicide. It's very hard to watch. It's because you're seeing one chick kill its siblings, or a sibling or its siblings. And the other sort of perplexing thing is that the parents just stand by and they never intervene. So Iris can be sitting there, or Louis can be sitting there watching these chicks really hammer on each other. They don't intervene, they don't do anything to stop it. And so why we think this is an adaptation where we see it is the birds will lay the maximum number of eggs they can produce physiologically, not knowing if the fishing conditions are going to be really good or really lousy. And then the chicks sort of sort it out themselves. It's a self-regulating behavioral mechanism that ends up with the maximum number of chicks that survive and are able to be big and healthy. So for example, if there's enough food this year to raise 2 big healthy chicks, that's what will happen, rather than raising, say, 3 or 4 weak sickly chicks, none of which would survive at all. So it is hard to watch, the siblicide, but it is an absolutely natural adaptation. We see it not only in ospreys, but as I said, hundreds of species of birds around the world that deal with unpredictable food supplies. So right now, the risk is, I suspect that the 2 biggest chicks will make it. I'm still not sure about the smallest chick. You can see that during the feeding bouts, sometimes it's usually the last to get fed, and sometimes its older siblings get right up there and they get most of the food. But Louis been doing a great job. He's been bringing in a couple fish a day, 2, sometimes 3 fish a day. They've been mainly mountain whitefish. The last bunch of fish that he's been bringing in have been mountain whitefish. And so you can see right now, if you can see the chicks, it looks like they're all in a food coma, and which is a good thing. So so we don't know what's going to happen, but there could be siblicide, and I suspect that the smallest chick wouldn't make it in that case.
Yeah, and this is, as you said, something that we face each year, and when it's a natural thing like this, it's not a point at which we intervene either.
Yeah. So let me say just a few things about our philosophy, and this is not just mine but yours, Charles, with as overseeing all of the Cornell Nest cameras, is that what we're witnessing, we're very privileged to witness the intimate lives of these wild creatures, dealing with all the challenges that are thrown at them. We've got a set of guidelines and rules about when we will intervene, and, for example, go up to the nest with a bucket truck. And our sort of rules of engagement are, if there are things that are threatening the ospreys that are caused by humans, we will help them out. So, for example, if they get tangled up in baling twine or fishing line or fish hooks, things like that, we will go up and try to sort that out. But natural things like siblicide, that's just completely natural. It's not our role to meddle with this natural adaptation. So it's hard to watch, and it seems cruel, but it's nature's way of dealing with unpredictable food supplies and producing the most number of healthy chicks.
That's a great overview of the idea of sort of that it is a privilege for us to watch, and that it's important to understand all the aspects of these birds' biology, and this is definitely something that they have.
In the past, we've received questions, which have been good ones, but people have asked us, if there's a small chick that's really getting beaten up, why don't we go up, get it, take it home, and feed it, and raise it ourselves, and then let it go? And there's a whole bunch of answers to that, but the short answer is, well, as I explained, it's not really our part to intervene like that. But also, ospreys are one of the most difficult raptors to deal with in captivity. They're very, very hard. And also we would have to deal with issues of imprinting. So if I took these babies home, they'd imprint on humans, and they would think that they were people. And so when they grew up, first of all, I wouldn't do a very good job of being a parent, not nearly as good as Iris and Louie. And then they'd be pretty messed up and probably wouldn't survive.
Great. You can hear me. Sorry about that. As you can imagine, we have lots of questions regarding the chicks and nesting ecology and behavior. So I thought I'd jump into a long list here that I have. If it looks like, everybody out there, if it looks like sometimes Erick's moving his mouth and you can't hear him, that's because I'm trying to reduce my echo on there as well. So if I'm asking a question right now, I'm muting Erick, so you don't have to listen to me twice. And then I'll click him back on to answer. One of the things people wondered about is that, how does Iris know that chicks are getting fed equally? George asked us this on Twitter, and you've kind of touched on this, but I think it's an important point when watching these the adults feed. Go ahead.
Well, I don't think Iris knows that they're getting fed equally, and I think, in fact, that they don't feed the chicks equally. And you'll see it's all about location, location, location. So you'll see when the chicks are vying for food and begging, it's generally the one that's closest to the Iris, usually, who's doing the feeding and is doing the most vigorous begging. So it doesn't look like she consciously distributes the food around. Sometimes she will give food to some of the other chicks that are a little bit more in the back, but it tends to be sort of first come, first serve. And then what happens is, say the largest fish gets really pigs out, it will tend to just lose interest in feeding, it's so full, and go into a food coma. And then the smaller chicks get fed, say the second in line and then the third in line. So if there's a lot of fish, that's generally the way it works. So I don't think these birds are making a conscious effort to distribute the food around at any given time. It's just sort of the biggest mouth that's closest to them gets the food.
And thinking about that behavior of when the chicks are getting the food, some people have written in wondering about a behavior that they've noticed. ALC on Twitter asked, why does the chick sometimes vigorously shake its head just after Iris puts food in its mouth? Help with swallowing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if they're not getting a fish bone inside their mouth, and they shake their head. Sometimes the fish is really sticky, and the other day one of the osprey chicks got a big glop of sticky fish goop stuck right on its eyeball. So when they swallow, they seem more to gulp vigorously. The side to side shaking, I'm not sure what that's about, but some sort of irritation, I suppose.
Yeah, I like the idea about it possibly being a fishbone. That's kind of a neat way to think about it. One thing we saw this morning, and someone asked a question on Twitter about this as well, is when a large live fish is delivered to the nest, are the chicks in danger from the flapping fishtail? We actually saw a chick getting sort of kind of the ultimate in kind of epic fail. I think it was the smallest chick at the time, going for a fish and having the tail of a headless fish basically bowl it over in the nest, and it sort of rolled 3 times. I wonder if this is something you've seen actually present a danger, or if it's just sort of part and parcel of being in the nest.
It's part and parcel of being in the nest, but yeah, sometimes, I mean, these are fresh fish, aren't they? When they're still flopping around, you can't get any fresher than that. We've never, I mean, they do get slapped around occasionally, but they get dispatched fairly quickly once Iris gets her talons on them. I mean, she'll go at them, and they're done for pretty quickly. But I'm not worried about it. They do get slapped around, but I've never seen them get harmed. Sometimes the sticks that Louis brings in seem to pose more of a danger when he puts big lumber right on top of the chicks. But
yeah, he's quite the ardent builder. So going on this whole idea of food as well, it's not just the chicks that are needing food. Both of the adults do, and Louis obviously is off foraging some of that time. But do we know anything about how much he's eating when he's off and away? I mean, is he catching and eating his own fish and then bringing some fish, or eating part of the fish and then bringing the other part? Is there any idea? Do you have some sense of what he's doing while he's away, and how much he's bringing versus eating, I guess?
yeah, that's a great question. I'm not able to follow Louis around too much fishing. He's not a diagnostic the way Stanley was with his missing feather. And there's ospreys fishing up and down the river, so I can't identify him when he's out fishing. And so, can the audience see and hear Iris right now?
They should be able to.
So she's really yakking. I'm going to look out the window and see if I can tell what she's looking at. I think that's her bald eagle call. There's a bald eagle nest just around the corner, and I think she's upset. There's a bald eagle soaring very high, so that's sort of an alarm call. Louis is not around, so he might be off securing the perimeter. But yeah, I don't know much about where Louis is going to fish, and he may be going pretty long distances to fish, and he might oh, yeah. Oh, there's a person right underneath the nest. I see that. That's what she's upset about too. I suspect most of the time if he catches a fish, especially if it's been a long time since Iris and the chicks have had anything to eat, that he boogies right back home. And that's certainly the case when he brings in these fish that are still alive, or he hasn't eaten the head off the fish. If the fish comes in and the head is missing, he's stopped somewhere along the way and eaten the head. And that's what the males do. They'll typically eat the head and then bring the rest of the fish in.
Yeah, we've certainly seen our fair share of headless fish coming into the nest. One question we got via Twitter, Piper asked, she was really wondering about when the chicks hatch, if they have sort of any immunity or any known immunity to pathogens like bacteria or viruses, and whether or not there's any common diseases that ospreys happen to experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. They probably got a pretty good immune system, healthy immune system. uh, the body temperature of all birds is pretty hot. They're about 104 degrees Fahrenheit, so considerably higher than that would be a really bad fever for us, but that's what their thermostat is set at. And we know that a lot of bacteria get cooked out that hot. So it seems like birds are pretty good at dealing certainly with bacterial infections. That's not to say they don't get bacterial infections. We don't know an awful lot about the diseases of birds or ospreys in particular. I mean, we do know some general stuff. They do have feather lice and intestinal parasites and things like that. One thing we do know is that they're susceptible to West Nile virus, and another concern around here is what's called equine encephalitis, which is a disease that's transmitted through mosquitoes that bite horses that are infected, and then they can then if the mosquitoes go and bite deer or ospreys or other things, they can get it. So we do know that West Nile virus is a problem for these birds, and some other things, but not a lot of research on the diseases of ospreys.
Switching back over to food for a moment, a couple more questions thinking about food and food trade-offs. So the chicks can't thermoregulate right now. Do you have any sense of sort of probably physiologically to those young birds how important that food is versus the sort of brooding that's done to actually keep them alive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I saw that was submitted. So at this point, these birds cannot thermoregulate themselves. The chicks can't. And so if they were to become cold and wet, it would be game over very, very quickly. So I suspect right now that the most important thing is to keep them warm and dry, and that's certainly what Iris has done the last 2 days. Boy, did she ever look miserable, eh? Just hunkered down. I felt so sorry for her. I felt like going and putting an umbrella up over the nest. But right now, you know, it's mid-60s and intermittently sunny. A cloud just came by right now, but you can see she's off to the side of the nest, and she's just letting the chicks bask in the sun. So when it's rainy and wet and cold, the most important thing is for her to cover them up and not let them get wet. But that being said, when they're at this fairly small stage, you know, they've got to get food as well. So at least once a day, I start to get concerned if they're not getting fed at least once a day. Then you really worry about starvation and siblicide really kicking in. But you know, it looks like they're already all in a food coma for the day with that nice big white mountain whitefish that was brought in. So things are looking a lot better today than they were yesterday for the whole osprey family.
It seems like that is a bit of the way things go. It's feast or famine sometimes, and people are obviously wondering about the fishing conditions and thinking about, well, if they are challenging. One person writes over email, you know, are there alternate prey species that aren't necessarily fish? Or Joanne over email asked whether or not they might eat something else if the fishing conditions are bad. And I wondered if, in all your experience studying these birds, watching them on cam, everything, have you ever seen them bring anything, or is there evidence for them sort of eating on much of anything else than fish?
Yeah, great question. Ospreys really are fishing eagles, fishing specialists. 99.9% of their diet is fish, and so even when the fishing is really tough, it's not as if they've got this ground squirrel colony right under the nest, you know, and red-tailed hawks and the bald eagles that have nests within a couple hundred yards, you know, they're eating a lot of ground squirrels. These guys got ground squirrels 50 feet under the nest, and yet they never go after them. There are records in the literature of them very, very rarely picking up small mammals and things. I've never seen it. One year this is about 4 years ago, Stanley actually brought in a very large, very alive crayfish. And so I suspect, you know, he saw it in the water and just went down and got it. But it was snapping its, he dropped it in the nest and it was snapping its claws at Iris and the chicks, and they backed off, and the crayfish scooted to the side and then flipped off the edge of the nest. So that's the only non-fish thing I've ever seen Osprey bring in at this camera or other ones I've been watching.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing given given all the food, as you say, that is actually around them and those big honking talons, that you have a bird that can be so specialized that it sort of overlooks all that. It's just not, it's not even on its radar screen, it appears, you know. And speaking of being on its radar scene, I think some of our people out there are probably fishermen or fisher people. And Joanne wondered over email whether or not ospreys have any kind of polarized filter that enables them to see fish through the reflecting surface of the water. You know how fishermen often wear polarized glasses. Is there any evidence for something like that helping osprey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not aware of that. I don't know enough about that. I'm not sure if anybody's looked for that. I know that fishing success does go down when it's very sunny and glary and there's a lot of reflection. So they've got, frankly, I don't know how they catch fish a lot of the time, because right now the rivers are just cranking. They're so high and so muddy. And so just the fact that they can really see any fish and catch any fish amazes me constantly. But I don't know about the sort of UV polarizing filter sort of thing.
And sort of sticking on the topic of vision, we had a couple other questions about whether or not they can see at night, and also whether or not they can see, if you have an idea of the angle of view that they can see when, like, for example, if Iris is looking right at the camera, is she actually able to see something right in front of her, or is there a blind spot?
Yeah. No, so they've actually got pretty good binocular vision, which means that they can see pretty well in front of them. So when the birds face the camera, you can see both of their eyes sort of pointing right at you. They are up off to the side as well, so they've actually got better peripheral vision than we do, because their eyes are more on the side of their head. But if you think about it, when they're diving, when they're locked onto a fish in the water, they don't really need to see stuff around the side. They've got to be focusing on what's right in front of them as they're locking on and making the dive. So they do have really, really good forward vision, as well as being able to see stuff off to the side better than we do.
And is there any evidence for them to be able to see in really low light or at night?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not sure about that. Certainly, they're certainly not like owls that can see really, really well in the dark or very low light conditions. But we do have, Stanley used to bring in fish. Sometimes he brought them in the pitch, like at 4 in the morning when it was really dark out. And, you know, even this year, Louis has been bringing in fish really early in the morning, sometimes when it's still very low light conditions. I've wondered about that. And with Stanley, I think what he might have been doing is going to there's a man-made pond that's stocked with fish, and it's specifically for kids to fish in. It's a kids fishing pond. It's about a mile from here, and there's street lights around it. So I think Stanley would sort of sit in the trees above this lit pond and be able to catch fish at night. But generally, no, they're not fishing at night at all, really.
And Kathy writes in over email. She's wondering, this is the kind of question that will be answered probably in good time to viewers, ardent viewers. But once the chicks are older, she wonders, will Iris start fishing to help supplement the food? Yes,
yeah, absolutely. So in previous years, what happens is once the chicks get a good covering of their own feathers, right now they've just got they're in their pajamas with just the little down feathers. But once they get covered with body feathers, they'll be able to thermoregulate on their own. And so once they get older and require more food, Iris will start to leave them more and more. And so sometimes there'll be no adults and she'll go off fishing as well. But generally, until they're really big, Iris will be sticking pretty close, but she will start fishing. Viewers have probably noticed that from time to time she'll take off and leave the chicks. And I always worry a little bit when I see that, but when I watch her, what she's doing, I think she's just very, very thirsty. And so she did it this morning just before we started this interview. And so I saw that she left the nest, and I was able to run and look out the window. And what she did is she just flew down to the river, drank some water, and hopped right back up. So she was gone no more than 1 or 2 minutes, and she was just taking a drink. So she's very careful about right now about not leaving those chicks alone, except to get a little drink of water.
So staying on this topic, I mean, as you can imagine, the two main things that are going on at the nest right now is baby birds and fish, right? And so we've watched sort of what happens when a fish comes into the nest, and often it seems like that fish is just stuck on the adult's foot. And we had a question over email from Patricia wondering if Osprey can release the fish from the talons and scales, or whether or not it has to actually be pulled off. And if that's the case, what does a lone osprey do? And so, given how difficult it seems to be an interesting question.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? When Louis comes in, sometimes, I mean, that fish is stuck on there. I mean, the talons are extremely curved, and so when they hit the fish, there's sort of a reflex, and they really grab in. And it's pretty clear that it's difficult for them to get the fish off. And we see this tug of war regularly where a hungry iris will grab it, and she'll really have to yank pretty hard. And you can see he's not trying to hold on to it. It's just he can't. His big curved talons are really stuck in there. I think single birds, like if we watch Louis when he's on the pole and he's eating, he's sort of able to, over time, sort of to manipulate the fish so he can get his talons off of there. But it is interesting, there are published records in the literature of ospreys diving and locking onto really, really big fish, bigger fish than they should have. In some cases, these have been salmon off the Pacific coast. And the salmon have dove underwater and dragged the ospreys under, and the ospreys have drowned. And then so there's a fish swimming around underwater with a dead osprey, and eventually the fish dies and they've been recovered. So there's been recorded cases of dead fish washing up with dead, drowned ospreys stuck on them.
That is incredible. That is actually a story. That's an account I have not heard. Thank you for sharing that, because I've seen bald eagles hunting in the Pacific Northwest and unable to bring a fish out of the water and swimming back to shore with the fish. But the idea that they would choose to grab something that's too big even for that and get dragged under, it's an impressively big fish. And thinking about saltwater and freshwater, we had a question from Jane over email wondering about whether there are differences in the ospreys that live near saltwater or freshwater, or if there's anything, I don't know if it would be genetic or just, take a look.
I'm still here.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm still here. Iris just left the nest, so the chicks are alone, and I just dashed over to the window, so I suspect she's still thirsty and she's just flown down to the river. So I'll start my stopwatch here. She'll probably be back in a minute or two, but it's nice and sunny, and so I think she's just going to get some water. But yeah, the question is a good one about how do ospreys, which can fish and in the oceans and saltwater, how do they deal with that? I don't think they have any specialized glands to get rid of excess salt the way some seabirds do. So, for example, the albatrosses, the tube noses, say on the top of their beaks, they have a gland that excretes extra salt. Saltwater fish aren't going to be really, really salty, so it's probably not an issue. But a lot of the birds from around here, they're eating freshwater fish, obviously, during the breeding season. And yet many of them go and winter either on the Pacific Ocean, say in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Mexico, or on the Atlantic side in the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of these birds will be fishing in freshwater during the breeding season and fishing in saltwater during the non-breeding season. So I don't think they have any special physiological adaptations for it, but they're just really versatile.
It's a great point that we're lucky enough to have them here for our our sunny months of the year, but they're often someplace else, potentially where there is seawater. So these birds are remarkably adaptable for sure. So another viewer wondered about Louis's timing of bringing fish into the nest, and wondering whether there's a time of the day where it's more likely where fish are brought in. In this case, she was noting that it doesn't seem like he brings fish to the nest in the mornings very often. And is there a reason that you might have for that, just based on the local conditions and the fish?
Yeah, I think the fishing conditions right now have been really, really challenging, really tough. So I'm amazed that he's turning out to be a really good dad, a really good fisherman. And I think it's just he's out fishing hard, especially when he and Iris and the chicks haven't eaten for quite a while. He's just out fishing pretty much nonstop. And I think we see fish being brought in when he's caught them. This morning, a fish was brought in pretty early. The first feeding of the day was, I think, around 7:30 in the morning with this big mountain whitefish. So that was pretty good. So I think it's just catch can, and he brings them in when he gets them. Yeah, the main stem of the Clark Fork here, we've had about an inch of rain, slightly over an inch of rain in the last couple days. So it's looking out the window, it's screaming, and it's brown and muddy. I suspect he's going up into some side tributaries and some lakes, some that are a little bit clearer up in the mountains. But yeah, it's a challenge, and he's figuring out this is will be his first successful breeding season, we hope, and I suspect really learning the ropes about where the good places to fish are in different times of the year.
So jumping off from that idea of him moving around, we have a few different questions about, and also thinking about the future. We have a few different questions about this nest and the chicks in this nest, and whether or not you'll be doing anything with these chicks to further sort of the scientific agenda of the Osprey Project. So Kathy writes over email, will you be taking blood samples from these chicks? And along with that, we had several different people asking about satellite packs. So maybe if we could start with the blood and then move into sort of the sat pack.
So that's a great question. So this nest camera is focusing obviously on this one special Hellgate nest, but this is just one small part of a much larger research project we've got going on. So we're monitoring well over 200 osprey nests, and the research component of this project started out as an ecotoxicology study. Since ospreys are at the top of the aquatic food chain, by looking at the blood and the feathers of these chicks, that tells us an awful lot about the health of the river systems, the aquatic systems. And so for those people who don't know, there used to be the largest EPA Superfund site was called Milltown Dam, was just about 5 miles upriver from the nest right here. And there was an old copper mine in Butte, Montana, which is more than 100 miles upriver, and a lot of heavy metals, copper, arsenic, cadmium, zinc, lead, selenium, very high levels of toxic heavy metals had come down the river and were in the sediments and getting into the food supply. So the research part of what we do with these ospreys is take these very small blood samples from the chicks. Longtime viewers of this camera will remember that we used to go up with a bucket truck and do these alien abductions, grab the chicks, take them down, band them. We used to band them and take very small blood samples and feather samples and get them back up to the nests as soon as we could. We stopped doing that a number of years ago, so we will not be banding these chicks or taking blood samples. Mainly because we've set this one nest aside as an educational nest, a camera nest where we can just watch these birds undisturbed. We're taking blood samples at, as I said, lots and lots of other nests over about a 150-mile stretch of the Clark Fork River as well as other places. So we do know a lot about, we're sampling osprey chicks from nests a mile or so down the river and just a couple miles up the river. So we've got a really good sense of what the toxins in the river are right around here. But we won't be bothering these birds at this camera. We just don't want to disturb them and put them at risk. The satellite packs, yeah, so we haven't made an effort to catch Iris or Stanley before he died, or Louis. We could catch them. It's a little harder and more stressful on them. And for a number of years now, we have not banded the chicks, and we're not going to. So we, being all of the viewers, have to put up with a little bit of mystery. These are wild creatures. We don't know where Iris or Louis or Stanley before him went for the winter. We don't know where they spend their time when they weren't here. We don't know where the chicks go and where they'll end up breeding if they're lucky enough to survive that long. But the satellite transmitters, so a colleague of mine, Rob Domenech, who really started this Osprey project with his uncle, who had a roofing company called Dave Taylor Roofing Company, and he was fantastic. He provided these big lift trucks, bucket trucks. So Rob is the director of a group called Raptor View Research Institute, which is here in town in Missoula, and he's one of the world's leading experts in raptor migration, ecology, and conservation. And he's the one who's spearheading putting on these satellite transmitters, along with what's called MPG Ranch, which is just south of Missoula here. There's about 30 of these satellite transmitters that have been put on these ospreys over the years. And this is not a cheap endeavor. Each of these satellite packs costs about $5,000. So you can see it runs into some serious pocket change pretty quickly. But they're programmed to send a signal up to an Argos satellite once an hour during the daytime. And so for those birds that we've got satellite transmitters on, we know where they're spending their lives basically within about 10 feet every hour. So those satellite transmitters are providing a ton of information about the fascinating aspects of where birds from around here go when they're not here, how young birds figure out how to migrate, where they go, because the young chicks don't go with their parents. The parents just leave, and one day the chicks are in the nest and mom and dad aren't coming back. They have to figure out how to migrate, how to find good winter spots, how to learn. They have to learn to fish all on their own, so it's pretty remarkable. But we're now at a point with the satellite transmitters, Rob and his crew, that we're putting together a pretty complete story of what it's like to be a young osprey or older ospreys and where they go and how they get there. It might be really fantastic if we could schedule another one of these hour-long live interviews, and I could have my colleague Rob Domenech here, and it would be great for him. He could really summarize a lot better than I could all the important and fascinating stuff we're learning about osprey movements and migration from the satellite transmitters, as well as the bands we put on chicks at nests.
Yeah, that would be really great. So maybe as the season goes on, certainly before, if we're lucky enough to have chicks get to the point of fledging, that might be an excellent time, depending on people's schedules, to bring Rob into the conversation, you know, before these birds head off into parts unknown. That'd be really neat. And sort of, again, thinking a little bit about the future, we had a few questions about thinking about federal funding and how that relates to the Montana Osprey Project or other groups working sort of for osprey conservation and learning about the kinds of things you're learning about, as well as thinking about sort of how this Osprey Project is part of the culmination of this giant cleanup process as well. And so is there anything, you know, broadly speaking, from a federal point of view, that looking towards the future, there's going to be more or less effort maybe spent in cleanup that you've heard from working, you know, in the trenches?
How political do you want me to get?
Not at all.
No, not at all. Yeah. No politics, no religion. So most of the funding for everything we've done so far has come from the state of Montana, as well as other sources. There was a legal settlement between the state of Montana sued a company about the mine waste, and that is being administered by the Montana Department of Justice. And so a lot of our funding for what we do is coming through the state of Montana. We recently, this last fall, received money from NASA, so that is federal money, through what's called the Montana Space Grant Consortium. So that is some federal money, NASA money that we do have. NASA was really interested in not so much the research part of it, but in having us develop a curriculum for middle school kids that would be in what's called E-STEM, environmental STEM, and STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And so we did receive a grant from NASA, and we're currently really excited about this program. We're developing a curriculum, a science curriculum, and we're going to start small here in Montana. But the exciting thing is that most schools in Montana are about you know, a mile or so from an osprey nest. So this is a species that's widespread here. And NASA was particularly interested because of the various sorts of technologies that we use for this research. So I'm a pilot, so I fly a lot for this research. The ospreys are heavier than air, so how does something heavier than air stay up in the air? How do they migrate thousands of miles? How do they dive 100 miles an hour and with such fine control? So a lot of aerodynamics. We use drones. We fly drones in this research, and we do a lot of chemistry and physics and math, and so that's some federal funding that's on the small side. In terms of larger issues, the environmental issues of the big concern, one of my big concerns right now for these birds around here is the exceedingly high levels of mercury in the river system and in the fish. So unfortunately, a lot of these chicks are just loaded with mercury, hundreds of times higher than would be acceptable in humans. The current, or the protections for clean air and clean water and funding for things like EPA and even NASA, those are probably going to get cut in fairly major ways. So I'm I'm not holding my breath about being able to get federal money for when it comes to environmental issues. We've seen that coal right now is being pushed by the current administration big time. The largest source of new mercury in global ecosystems right now is coming from burning coal. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of important environmental issues that these ospreys are telling us about. I think a lot of the federal priorities we're seeing right now are going to preclude sort of increases in funding for this kind of research. But we're managing. There's tons of other people that do think that this is important information, and it's important to worry about mercury in clean water and things like that.
Great answer. Great job framing it without also flaming it. There's a few, we ran, since we started late, we're going to let us run over a few minutes if you've still got a couple minutes, Eric. And, you know, one thing that has come up, hold on one second, I'll let you say that because you probably, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't want to forget about the T-shirts.
That's where I was going next.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, this is Stanley. This is a spectacular woodcut. You can tell it's Stanley because of the missing feather. These are T-shirts that were made by a very wonderful, talented artist who lives here in Missoula, Claire Emery. And this is an original woodcut, and then it's printed. These T-shirts, we've got, she's got men's and women's and children's sizes in a bunch of different colors. And I know it's been a long time in coming, but we are going to be offering these through Claire's website, and we'll be getting those out. They'll be going for $30 a piece, and a lot of that money will go directly to support this Montana Osprey Project. So I know a lot of people have been wondering about the T-shirts, and here's a brown one just to show you different colors. That's a spectacular original woodcut that's been hand printed on these T-shirts.
Beautiful. That's exactly where I was leading you. I saw I could just barely make them out in the background there. So perfect timing, great minds and all that. So I have one more future question. And there's a couple questions that people had just for you that seemed kind of fun to get sort of a better sense of kind of your, just your experiences doing everything you've done related to these ospreys. But first, one future question. People are still wondering a little bit about future plans for this nest site and upgrades in the future or new features. And I wonder if you wanted to touch on maybe just a couple minutes about what those plans entail.
Sure. Well, the major upgrade, as probably everybody knows, this year was switching over the camera feed from the old low-resolution Ethernet cable that went through Riverside Health Center to a brand new fiber optic cable and power that goes under the parking lot that you can see in the background into the Missoula College where I'm sitting. And Charles, you came out and spent about a week here helping with that transition, but we spent, I spent about $10,000 for that upgrade with all the new computer equipment and all the new gear and the fiber optic, or the power and so forth. So that's been a fairly significant amount of money to make this. I mean, this high resolution camera, it's amazing, isn't it? It's really fantastic to have, you know, and it's not blinking out the way it was last year with the signal having to beam through Norway maple trees and so forth. So that was the major thing, the upgrade, and we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if Iris was going to come back, and so we didn't want to overdo it. Our plans now are definitely for a couple perches. So we want to put a perch somewhere close to the nest so that Louis can hang out. So many other osprey nests do have a perch there for the off-duty bird to rest at. The other thing that we want to do with the Missoula College students is there's a computer program here, there's an electronics technology program here. We want to design and build with the students high-tech perches so that when the ospreys land on them, they weigh themselves and we'll be able to tell what their mass is. And so how fantastic would this be when Louis, say, sits on a perch with a fish, we'll be able to figure out how much he weighs, how much the fish weighs by subtraction. And so we'll not only be getting information on all the species of fish that are being brought in, but how big they are, how much they weigh. The other sorts of things we would like to do are we want to mount a second camera on the side of the building right out this window. So if I look out that window, I see the perch with the owl on it where Louis sits a lot of the times. And so when he's sitting there with the fish, the camera operators can zoom in on him, but it's pretty far away and it's a sort of shaky picture. But if we had a second camera here, we could zoom right in on the fish. So that's one thing that may happen that we're working on as well. The other thing that's really high priority for me is I want to get a lot more students involved in this. A lot more student internships, both sort of the biology, chemistry side. There's a nursing program here. They're very interested in the issues of mercury. It's a human health issue here as well. And so just getting a lot more students, getting this integrated into curricula in really exciting ways, and getting internships for students, and that takes money too. So lots of future plans. The first ones people will probably see are the perches. The other thing I might do after the birds leave in the fall is raise the camera up just maybe a foot or so, because this year when they made the sides so high, it got really hard to see the eggs even. And now that it's getting trampled down and the chicks are getting bigger, we can see into the nest. But I think if the camera was just a touch higher, it might give us a slightly better angle. So those are modifications down the road.
Well, of course, if you need any help getting that camera a little bit higher, you know who to call. Well, so we're just about done here. I'd love to ask you a couple of just general questions from viewers. We have over 1,000 people, 1,100 people watching right now. Some of them might be meeting you for the first time. And kind of 3 questions for you. 1, how did you get interested in birds and ospreys? I'm going to say all 3 now, and then we'll go back through them. 2, what's the biggest surprise you've seen on cam, maybe that you haven't seen in the wild or anywhere else? And 3, what's a really, if you had to go back and think through all the years of running this cam, what would be kind of your top 1 or 2 or 3 highlights? So the first one again would be, how'd you get interested in birds and ospreys? Yeah.
Well, before I get to the questions, let me just, say hi to the 1,000+ people out there, and also make an open invitation is if anybody is ever in the Missoula area or interested to coming to Missoula during the breeding season, please let us know, and we'd love to give you a tour of some of these nests. And if you're around when we're doing the research, you'd be more than welcome to come with us when we band chicks and take blood samples and so forth. So if you're ever in the area, please don't be shy. Let me know, and we'll give you a good time. We'll roll out the Osprey red carpet for you.
We actually had a car pull up while we were replacing the camera this year with some people who were driving like from Spokane to someplace else, and they were like, "Oh, we just had to stop by and take a look at the nest," and that was just while we were sitting there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So your first question, how did I get interested in ospreys? And I've always been a nature nerd. I grew up in Quebec, and I dropped out of high school. I actually never finished high school. When I got an offer to work for a year in the Galapagos on Darwin's finches. So I dropped out of high school and lived in the Galapagos in South America for a year working on birds and Darwin's finches. And after that, I got a job for 5 years or so with the Canadian Wildlife Service, working about 900 miles, 1,000 miles north of the Arctic Circle on seabird colonies and trying not to get eaten by polar bears, essentially. And so I did then go to school at Dalhousie University, which is in Nova Scotia, and they let me in without finishing high school, which was rather nice of them. And for my undergraduate research project, I worked on ospreys. So I've been working on ospreys and been interested in ospreys for an awful long time now. And when I came here to Montana, I've sort of come full circle and been able to get back working on ospreys. So that's sort of a short history of my interest in ospreys. I go back a long time with ospreys. I guess some of so even though I've been working on ospreys for a long time, most of that I was just sitting on the ground with binoculars looking up and seeing ahead and not really getting to know these ospreys as individuals. So I'd have to say that the most amazing and enlightening things for me about this camera is just really, just like you viewers, getting this incredibly intimate view of the lives of a few individual wild creatures. And I've just been incredibly impressed. Every single day I learn something new about them. They've got their own personalities, but I'd have to say the drive of these birds as parents. I mean, isn't it remarkable? Iris she'll sit in the middle of a blizzard covered with 2-3 inches of snow when it's well below freezing. Last 2 days, not eating much. She's just been soaking, and I imagine cold and miserable. And she just is a fierce and a fantastic mother. She's cranked out a lot of babies in her life. We don't know how many, but she's certainly been a net producer for the local osprey population. And seeing things like even Louis, this young bird, how he was such a klutz last year, but this year he's turning out to be a great father, great replacement mate for Iris. He's a good fisherman. He's a great interior decorator. He loves moving those sticks around. And most importantly, right now, he's a really, really good fisherman. And that's what's most important to keep Iris and the chicks healthy and going. I forget what the third question was.
I think you might have combined it there. So one was a biggest surprise, and the other was sort of a highlights kind of idea. But I would call that almost more of a highlight there.
Yeah. Let me say one more thing that has been has been really surprising and has really delighted me, and that is, I really had to be dragged kicking and screaming in some ways into not so much the camera, but the social media side of it. And at the beginning, I was like, what the hell is this Facebook and Twitter? But I've got to say, I've been astounded and pleasantly surprised by the connections that have been made by people all over the world watching this one camera. And I feel very humbled to be able to be a part of this. But it's clear that there's this large community of people in hundreds of countries all around the world who make connections, all based on this one remarkable pair of ospreys. And so to me, that's been another big surprise and a pleasant surprise.
Well, I think that pretty much does it for both our time and our questions. You did mention something about the T-shirts, and so I thought I'd sort of press you a little bit on if there is an anticipated date.
Well, we're working on that. There's some issues about how people pay for it, whether whether it's tax deductible and legal issues like that. But we hope within a week or so, and it'll be widely publicized, and I'll let you know. But and I suspect we're sort of low on numbers, so we're going to do another printing of T-shirts, I suspect, so that we have more T-shirts if the demand is up there. But within a week or so, I hope.
Awesome. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up, and also say thank you to Erick. It was really great talking with you.
Yeah, so let's plan on maybe in a month or so. It'd be fun to get my buddy Rob Dominich in here, and we could talk a lot more about what we've learned from the satellite transmitters and the banding about how birds move around and where they spend their time.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.